Welcome to Talking Targaryen. Today we're talking about House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 5, Regent. This podcast will of course have spoilers through that episode, but no future spoilers. We haven't read Fire and Blood, and we don't even watch the Next Time On previews. I'm Gil, by the way, here with my brother Daniel.
Hey, what's up?
And Adam.
Hello. And I'll say I also don't watch the previously on part.
Me neither, because that's also a spoiler. You see that the Starks show up? Oh, that's going to be a plot point this episode.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts. I think I went last time. I believe Adam went the time before that. Daniel, you know what that means. I'm throwing it over to you.
Oh, man. I wasn't expecting you to ask me for overall thoughts. I like this episode. I didn't love it. I didn't feel like I really had much of a strong reaction to almost anything in this episode, which was very different from the last one. But as usual, I'm excited to go through it in more detail. I think as we talk through parts of it, I'm going to either get excited or mad about parts. We'll see. But it was good. I don't know. Didn't jump out that much to me. And some disappointments.
Okay, Adam, what about you?
So I've been craving an episode that feels like, okay, things calm down for a second. They're not trying to just keep pushing the plot forward faster and faster and faster. And so this episode achieved that. There were important things that happened. We got to see things slow down a bit and have a lot of conversations, which is something I actually really liked from Game of Thrones. I think in our last podcast, Daniel said he doesn't want it to slow down. And
in your face, Daniel.
Yeah.
Too much talking.
But I have mixed feelings because I kind of got what I wanted, but nothing about it was that memorable. I feel like in Game of Thrones, whenever I say something about, back in Game of Thrones, but I'm using Game of Thrones as a positive example, I mean the first half of the series. But in Game of Thrones, there, even to this day, there are very memorable conversations that happened where there are specific lines that still resonate with me. I mentioned one with Littlefinger when he says chaos is a ladder, for example. That's a line everyone knows, and it was just because it was such a well-written conversation. Whereas I don't know, I just don't have that same feeling about this past episode.
I think when you're referencing Game of Thrones, just as shorthand, so we know if you're talking about the entire series or just part of it, you just use whatever percentage of the title. So if you're just talking about the first 4 seasons, you say, back in game of, if you're going through season 5 or 6.
And if I say back in Thrones, I mean when it was bad. Yeah.
I like the episode overall. I think I agree with most of what you guys said. I think the thing I liked most about it, in terms of slowing down and talking through what to do next in this war, I feel like every step in this war has been a big, brash, emotional decision that isn't thought through. And I feel like this episode, we got more genuine chess match type stuff, which I enjoyed. My one complaint probably, and it's not a huge complaint, I like the theme of seeing the impact on the common folk. But I do feel like the common folk, although they're represented as this kind of shorthand monolith sort of thing where they don't feel like real people. It just feels like, there's a big group of common folk. And I'll talk about in detail why I feel that way as we go through the recap.
I agree. That feels like, in a way, it feels like almost breaking the fourth wall, because it seems like a very deliberate thing because we're not seeing a lot of this stuff through the eyes of our main characters. They're just choosing to leave what we've been focusing on for all this time just to show us the common folk because they feel like they need to.
Yeah.
Which they do need to, but they need to do it more naturally.
All right, Hugh is hungry.
Yeah.
But the king is going to pay him one day.
Don't forget, he's got a sick kid. It feels like those scenes feel like I'm watching a high school play. And I don't mean because of the acting or something, but just because of I'm just not feeling the drama. I know they're trying to make it feel heartfelt and tug on our heartstrings, but it's just not working.
I know Hugh, okay, for Better Call Saul fans, when we cut to Hugh, it feels like when we cut to Mike's daughter-in-law.
Yes.
Remember those scenes?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll also say, again, not a major complaint, but just something that made me laugh a little bit. You know, one of the things with this show is people zip around like crazy. You know, oh, we got to go to this place. Okay, next scene, they're there. But it starts to feel a little funny when now one of the major plot points is how long it takes, you know, for the Greybeards to get from the north to the Riverlands. Now, I think part of that is because our main characters have dragons, so they get to places much faster. But it's almost like, I feel like we need a reminder of how big this world is and how long it takes people to get places. So then when you get to a moment like this, it doesn't feel as, oh, so like last episode, she can get there in 2 seconds, and now all of a sudden it takes forever.
I think that there should never be a situation like this show should avoid the following. Don't say, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to go over to X and do Y and Z. Next scene. Okay, I'm in X. Now it's time to do Y and Z. Like, you need at least one scene of that character in between. Either
actually, you know, I feel like on the podcast it might give the impression they don't do that because I put the scenes next to each other. Generally, there are a couple of scenes in between.
Well, I haven't actually been watching the show. I just listened to us talk about it.
It's my fault. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we got a comment a couple of weeks ago where someone complained about how much criticism we had right at the start of the podcast. So I
remember that. Yeah.
It wasn't that we had criticisms. It was like, don't just hit me with it all at once.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, I think for me, that was pretty much my criticism. So I got it out of the way. And
I have one more.
I'll reiterate them again as we go.
Yeah. I have one. Well, what usually happens too is the more we talk about an episode, the more it reminds me of other things that I didn't like. even though this is like the best show on TV right now.
It absolutely. I mean, it's the only show I'm watching.
Yeah, but the fact that Aegon is live infuriates me because if you know that you're gonna have him survive, then don't show us something that's not survivable.
He had Valyrian armor on, Valyrian steel,
which means that his body hit a steel wall at free fall speeds.
No, but so Valyrian steel probably. I think we're supposed to assume it has some type of like magical properties too. I guess, but I've never
heard of that would
really?
that would be kind of a BS addition into that would be like a retcon because Valyrian
I thought it was like
steel,
mithril armor or whatever.
But that's also that's not going to protect you from a fall. Like, think about it this way: if the floor was made out of Valyrian steel and you fell from 2,000 feet onto it, that would be even worse than landing onto the dirt.
Wait, am I missing? Wasn't there a scene where they mentioned like the anti-gravity properties?
Well, see, they reverse engineered the metal that was recovered after the Roswell crash and turned it into armor.
I have a theory I'll throw out there. He was lying next to the dragon. I think probably the dragon hit the ground first, and then he like bounced off of its torso, its belly fat or something. So it might have broken the fall a little bit. Which wasn't there a scene where they said that they were like, you landed on the belly fat? And kind of
it feels so artificial. It's one thing if it's like 100 years ago at like the dawn of cinema, and like death is this big dramatic thing, and you can use it as a cliffhanger to like titillate the audience and keep them guessing and get them anxious. But we've seen it. It is like literally the default way for someone to. When it comes to like a serious TV show, basically, in the end, the writers have to answer one question: who lives and who dies?
Right.
As if that's the only important thing that can happen. And so, I've literally, like, we have, between us, just in the shows that we've watched, have probably seen several hundred did they live or die cliffhangers across all the content that we've consumed. It's just really...
Wait, but that's on the periphery of the show. The real tension in this show is the will they or won't they story of Allison
and Rachel
and what's his name?
Cole.
Or
Lair. Oh, you mean Allison and Laris? Yeah,
both of them.
the love triangle.
Westeros is getting very progressive. Maybe there's room for all.
Yeah.
A throuple.
Will her foot or won't her foot?
I like how my favorite parts of this podcast is when we all think we have a witty remark. So just all of a sudden, everyone's talking to each other at once.
So I have a comment that's not a criticism. And I watched the previously on. Did either of you guys watch it like later? Or you didn't watch it at all?
No.
I probably should go back and watch afterward, but
I felt like the previously on took a stance. Well, I guess the whole episode. Okay, this episode pretty clearly, I think in general, showed that Aemon did it on purpose. I think was a lot of the implication. But the previously on, right when I watched it, I was like, okay, yeah, they decided Aemon definitely did it on purpose. Just the way they cut it, it just really looked like it was intentional.
yeah. I didn't watch the previously on, like as we've said, but I think there's no question Aemon did it on purpose, and they are making his motivations much more obvious now. In that he really wants the throne, and before this episode, it seemed like something he kind of wanted, but it wasn't the main thing that he was focused on. Now it kind of seems like it is.
Yeah, which I think might be a change. Like, I don't necessarily think that's a revelation.
Yeah.
It might be more of an evolution.
Which I think that's kind of cool, actually, because we haven't seen a lot of character development for Aemon recently. It's kind of like he just, have you ever seen that meme where it's like the guy who plays Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter, and apparently you know what he looked like when he was a kid, but he turned out into a very fit, handsome looking guy, and it's a picture of him in modern times on a book cover that says "How to Successfully Navigate Puberty," and it's like he just went from this like little schlubby Longbottom guy into hunky wizard, and feels like Aemon kind of did the same thing on this show just because of all the time jumps. So he went from like the bullied kind of meek kid who's like disgruntled into this like badass one-eyed warrior dude. And it's easy to feel like that's kind of where his character plateaued, and that's just what he is now. He's this Terminator. But I think we are seeing development, and we're seeing his own motivations evolve, like you said.
Yeah, I think so. You just reminded me, by the way, Aegon, he was special because he had an extra actor portray him in the time jumps. There were like 3 of them. And I remember there was one where he was a little bit older, but not the current Aegon. And then he aged a little more, and they put in this current actor. And if you look at the pictures, I feel like they just don't look alike, and their ages are too close together. Like Adam, when he was naked in the window and doing that thing that we talked about
that normally you do with the door.
I'd never heard of that kind of thing before.
What was that?
Yeah,
this was that was a different actor playing him at that point.
You know what? Okay, so I just pulled up a picture, and I actually think the fact that because I wanted to make sure that I saw the other actor, so I actually did search Aegon window, because I didn't know, like, how else am I supposed to search it? Like Aegon, not fully grown up, but not as a kid either.
But a little bit.
Yeah, but like a little grown up in the window. Now I'm on a list. But anyway, yeah, it actually looks nothing like him except for that he's pale, but like his lips are too red, and I actually think they did really good jobs with the casting mostly.
Yeah, they really bungled this one.
Yeah,
did you even look at his lips? He's like Rudolph, but for lips instead of a nose.
So when I go and look back at that, it's pretty egregious, actually.
I had something else to say on that, but I forget. Oh no, that's
all right. So whenever we want to refer to middle-aged Aegon, we can call it like Rudolph. The Rudolph.
I can't imagine where we're going to need to refer to him again after this. But maybe
we talk about the window scene like every episode.
That's true.
Well, that's you who talks about it every episode, Adam.
When Rudolph was polishing his nose.
Maybe that wasn't the same character. It's a different actor. Maybe that was Darren. The Darren we've been hearing about.
They did a real like switcheroo on us.
Yeah. All right, are we ready to get into the episode?
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered it. We could just wrap it up here.
Yeah.
Well, let's knock out some of the easy stuff first. Let's check in on Raena at the Vale.
Wait, are we splitting? Are we doing all the Team Black first.
Yeah, we're gonna do as always. I've curated this recap as best I can to stick with one storyline as far as we can go, without jumping back and forth, to make it as clear as possible.
Smell that.
Moon door.
Nice, because we're at the Vale, and this is where that kid in Game of Thrones would toss people through the moon door, that hole in the sky.
You'd be like, I want to see them fly, is what he would say.
That's right. And we see Jane Eyre, who was promised, if you recall, Jane Eyre promised Rhaenyra 15,000 men for her army in exchange for a dragon. And you recall that Baela showed up and was sent with just 2 little baby dragons. Aaron's not happy about that. And Raena says, I don't recall you specifying the size of the dragons you want.
In retrospect, she should have at least warned her that that's all she could spare. That's like a huge bait and switch, because presumably
it's an ask for forgiveness rather than permission kind of situation.
And that was literally what Rhaenyra said. She was like, she's not going to be happy about it. Please, just try to reason with her.
Yeah.
And make this work. But I'll say this. I think, is her name Baela or Raena?
This is Raena.
Raena should not have even said she reacts, right? When she says, oh, you didn't specify the size, and she's like, don't bait me or whatever. Obviously that is not a tactful thing to actually say.
Yeah. I mean, that said, she's trying to hold her own in this situation. We've never had to see her act political and brush elbows with these other major powers. So you could she's it's like she's trying on the personality of a ruler, and I guess she has to feel it out. So I bet we're gonna see her becoming more tactful and competent over time.
Yeah, so far I think the way she handled it at the end of the conversation is almost like turning Rhaenyra into a common enemy, where Aaron bemoans her lack of power in the situation, and Raena is like, me too. So I kind of took it as, yeah, look, I know this is, without outright saying it, Raina's like, yeah, I know the dragon thing is kind of BS, but
we both got screwed here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Aaron says, my sympathies for the death of your grandmother, Rhaenys.
Now, was that her giving the news to her, or did she know it already?
On my second watch through, as I watched it a couple times today, I was trying to figure that out. It's unclear to me. Raena definitely had a reaction.
Yeah.
It could easily have been
just being reminded.
That's right. Or I also could easily read her facial expression as this is news to me. Yeah. And she was just too shocked to say, wait, what?
If you piece together the chronology, this scene actually happened before the battle.
So she knew
that Aarons have prophetic dreams.
Or she played her hand because it was actually all part of the plan. You know what Jane Eyre should do is recall all the 15,000 soldiers and then send 15,000 young children instead. And be like, hey, you didn't specify how old they were.
She sends 15,000 child soldiers. Yeah. It's Adam's fault. It was Adam's idea.
All right. Well, I think we should leave the Vale on a high note. I don't think we're going to beat that insight you provided, Adam. So let's go. I think this has become our favorite location of the season. Let's go to Harrenhal.
Yeah.
Ooh, spooky. Spooky as always. You smell that? Spooky. Well,
ectoplasm.
There you go. Daemon, he tries to win over the Brackens. I don't know if people need a reminder, but you've got the Blackwoods and the Brackens. They hate each other.
All right, right off the bat.
Go ahead.
They just introduced the whole Brackens and Blackwoods feud and all that stuff just a few episodes ago.
Introduced in season 1.
Correct.
Early on.
How to what extent?
We saw them fight.
We saw them, and it was also a thing in, well, I won't even go there. I was going to say, I think it might have been a thing in Game of Thrones as well. Mm-hmm. But to me, Brackens versus Blackwoods was pretty well established and has been a running theme. The whole point of going to the Riverlands, as soon as he got there, it was like, I mean, first off, we had a battle between them, and Daemon's
Which they
big challenge.
skipped.
Right, which
you were okay with.
I know.
What's happening?
I'm just joking. I'm just being a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like Daemon's whole task here is we need to get the Brackens and Blackwoods on our side. It's going to be near impossible.
Okay.
I feel like they almost beat us over the head with how much they hate each other.
You're gonna witness something 99.9% of the human population is incapable of. I'm wrong.
Doubling down.
I'm doubling down on my position. I changed my mind. You actually persuaded me. That said, I do have to criticize something, and I'll say I think a lot of these issues stem from having a full year in between seasons.
2 years.
2 years between seasons, because I can't remember every little detail.
I mean, I'm sorry, but every episode this season, every episode has been like, oh man, those Brackens and Blackwoods, they're never going to get along.
Well, I know, but
we really need them to.
It felt like they just.
Wait, have we heard of these Brackens and Blackwoods before this week? I mean,
all right, how about this?
No. How about this? You need to stop skipping the previously on.
All right, maybe. I can't handle the responsibility of skipping it. But here's what they should do. Give us actual. Can you name a Bracken or a Blackwood?
Yes. Lord Bracken and Lord Blackwood. Actually, it's so funny you say that, because in my notes here, at no point do I have their names. And I was like, what are their names? And I looked at a couple of recaps. And first off, I was going to save this for later. But Forbes, I think they're listening to us. Because listen to this. The way they structure their recap is very descriptive. Like, let's head over to Dragonstone.
Hey.
But not only that.
They go,
let's go to Driftmark. Smell the sea air beneath us.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
No way.
That's our thing.
Yeah, it's our thing. And I'm like, you know what? If they stole from us, I'm going to steal from them. I want to know the names of these Brackens and Blackwoods. But they never name them. When there's a scene with Daemon and, I'll call him Lord, what are they called? Blackwood. And the Forbes article, they like cowards. They just referred to them as the Blackwoods. He deals with the Blackwoods. I'm like, no, he didn't. It was one specific guy who you're afraid to name because you don't want to rewatch the episode. I mean, neither did I. But yeah.
But
okay,
so that's what I'm saying.
On,
they're turning this into. It feels like somewhat of a contrived obstacle. That, in the sense that it's like this generic problem that Daemon has to overcome, because they're not really showing more specifics about it. Like, I don't know who those people are.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, though. Is like go ahead, Dan. I'll let you take this.
I guess that's fair. Maybe I guess from Daemon's perspective, that is the case. So, all right, you persuaded me again.
Yeah, I guess from Daemon's perspective, it is just sort of an annoying generic thing in the way. Yeah. But he knew it was going to be there. But I think the other thing is it has been set up. We've known about this in season 1 and maybe even earlier. And then also thematically, it fits with the whole show. Like like that conflict represents like a lot of the themes of the show.
Because they hate each other.
It's a microcosm.
Neither side remembers why, or both sides remember why, but the reasons are contradictory.
Well, and they like each remember their motivation is like whatever the most recent thing was.
Right.
Like so just whole one after another.
Aegon versus Rhaenyra conflict, they're just using as an excuse to fight each other, which gets pointed out explicitly in this episode and in the previous ones.
I do have to say, though, I forget, are we at that scene yet where Daemon's on his dragon in front of the Brackens?
Yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Hearing them talk about each other, each family, it just, maybe it's the point, it just feels so childish. Like, I can't help but laugh at them, where they're like, those, like, they're Brackens, they're from hell, and this and that. Like, it just sounds so dumb.
Yeah, which I think
it is believable, though.
That's the thing. It's believable, and it comes off as ridiculous. And I think that's part of the point. It's like a conflict that we can step outside of, and you look at it from the outside, and you're like, this is insane.
I mean, there are human beings, many of whom have killed other humans because they cheer for different sports teams.
Yeah. Actually, Daniel, I got to talk to you after this about that Rangers game. Well, I love how at this rate, I think if I calculate it, we're going to be recording for about 3.5 hours.
That's what they want. That's what the people want.
That's right. So Daemon's trying to win over the Brackens. Wait a minute. Who are the Brackens? They just got introduced last episode. Daemon's trying to win over the Brackens. He tells them, renounce Aegon, but specifically he says, bend the knee to me, not to Rhaenyra. Yeah. So he's getting more and more, I'm going to be the king.
This is interesting because this is happening after he had that nightmare last episode about Rhaenyra.
Right.
Do you think he's almost doubling down on it like I did? Like, well, he feels this inner conflict or turmoil, and it's kind of keeping in line with his personality. It's not like it's gonna suddenly make him less imposing when it comes to like his claim to the throne, but maybe he feels like, okay, like I resent these visions and these nightmares, and I'm gonna like push against them.
Yeah, or maybe he's experiencing this turmoil because he's been intending to push against them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he does feel that he wants the throne, but I think where you can question it is why does he feel that? And I think as we see some of his dreams and stuff this episode, we'll get some idea about that. He basically makes a proposition. Bend the knee to me or I'll kill you. I'll burn you. And they choose fire, turn their back on Daemon and his dragon. I found that moment to be pretty badass. Guy turns his back to a dragon and walks away. And then I love afterward, Daemon's just sitting there and he goes, I did not think they would be so eager to die. And I think he is
he's impressed.
People. Yeah, he's impressed, but I think also surprised. Like he's meeting people that have something he just hasn't seen a lot of or doesn't necessarily have himself. This sort of honor and integrity and fearlessness. And I think that's not the only time he'll be surprised by people this episode. Later, he learns that when you kidnap children, people, you were mad about that?
I didn't think it was a big deal. It seems, I don't think this isn't that important, but like from it was the Brackens who got burned.
Nobody got burned.
The Brackens who were at threat of being burned.
Yeah. Well, he did.
He did
but he said they.
So that's the issue because we only have generic characters.
I thought that they were doing that thing as usual where they cut over the good part. So I thought next scene, okay, in between scenes, he did burn them because I'm so used to it now where they just set up like, okay, well, if that's your choice, then. And then it cuts to the next scene.
Were you sleeping through this episode?
No. I spent the whole time keeping Alun awake.
That could have been the problem. You were looking at him instead because they explicitly discussed.
I thought I thought that maybe he burned some of them, and then it scared the rest into joining.
They have a conversation about it.
Okay.
Well, but to be. I was going to say to be fair, like maybe he could have burned a couple and let the others go. But essentially, the thrust of the conversation after that is like these are strong people. They were brave.
Okay. I do remember it now. What I was reacting to was in the moment, though. So like, I the more salient memory for me during this conversation was that feeling of course, they cut over the next action. Because that's how I felt in the moment when I was watching it. So I do remember the conversation that you're talking about, and it all makes sense to me now. But I do think it's a legitimate criticism is when you keep doing this thing in your writing where you set something up and then you don't actually show it happen, I'm like primed to just expect that like the big moments get skipped over.
Didn't it happen once?
No, it's happened plenty of times, and so many shows do it.
1 second, but you also were supposed to initially think they did burn. Like you were supposed to watch it and think they burned, and then you hear the conversation, you're like, oh wow, oh they didn't burn.
I didn't think that. I didn't think that they burned.
Really? I mean, the dragon starts to open its mouth. You see it like it's like getting ready to breathe fire, and then they cut away, and they're talking. And his first line is, "I did not think they'd be so eager to die." Yeah. I think you were supposed to think they burned.
Right, so that made me think, like, okay, he just killed them, and now he's reflecting on it.
Gil, we are screwed.
Every moment of this episode is controversial. So wait a minute, what? But anybody that thinks the show moves too quickly, we are completely solving that problem now.
Yeah. I will say this. The dragons continue to look better and better. And for the first time, we saw a view of someone actually on the dragon with the camera pointing at them from the front, which normally looks really weird and awkward. But because he wasn't flying and was instead just like, he's just propped up like in this high elevated position and just moving slightly because he's on this living creature. I thought it actually looked fine.
Yeah. I'll agree with you
What's
there.
so funny? What are you laughing at?
Well, no, it's just because it reminded me of back in the day when we would make animations in Flash, and I would use the tweens, and often the animation would just not look natural.
Exactly.
And so I was picturing them just artificially trying to move the frame so it looks like they're bouncing up and down on a dragon. And I could just, in my mind, I was relating to the difficulty of making that look right.
I did think that scene looked really cool, though. I agree with Adam.
Right. So afterward, Daemon talks to, well, not afterward, but in the conversation we were just talking about after he let them go, he's speaking to Lord Blackwood. And he says, look, maybe we need less fighting and more persuasion. Maybe convince him by some other means. Every man has a weakness. Basically, he's telling him to seduce him.
That's what I thought.
He tells him to do things that the crown cannot be seen to do. And things the crown does not want to see, to be frank. Basically, he's telling him to commit war crimes. All right, we'll come back to that later.
Well, honestly, at first I thought he was saying like just hire a bunch of prostitutes for the soldiers.
I really was thinking it was something like that too.
It did feel just when you're just beating around the bush like that, and you're talking about every man has a weakness. You know? Are you picking up what I'm putting down?
Yeah. But wait, so I actually don't know.
So he wants them to target children, women, basically take them hostage if you need to. Well, exactly that, and then use them as leverage to force them to bend the knee.
How fascinating that it never occurred to them to do that before. I mean, they're killing each other, but I guess they have like some sense of honor.
Well, I think that's part of what surprises Daemon this episode. I kind of joked about it earlier, like, oh, people get mad when you do that. But I think he was genuinely surprised that isn't seen as just part of warfare. He's surprised that there are actual quote-unquote rules to how you fight, this integrity.
Well, and what's interesting in a bigger picture is if this works out and Daemon's moves here actually end up helping his Team Black, then it may have been the right call for him to kind of go off on his own without Rhaenyra's permission, because she never would have approved that.
Well,
she never would have approved that method.
Yeah, I mean, and as we'll see later, I think he might have made a mistake.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll get to that shortly. But first, another interlude where Daemon has a strange dream where he's intimate with his mother while she tells him how...
that was?
I knew... I was proud of myself that, like, for some reason right away I was like, that's his mom.
Yeah,
I guess we have seen her, right? We've seen her before, maybe.
Oh, we saw at the beginning of the show.
At the very beginning.
No,
maybe I'm wrong.
We saw Viserys' wife.
Yeah, I think
they all look the same.
So now there's a line where she says, "If only you'd been born first, my favorite son." So that's the giveaway. And then later, when he sees Alice, the strange girl, and she says to him, "It's a shame you didn't know your mother." So that was a reference to, like, I've seen your dreams, or perhaps I created them. But while they are intimate, his mom is telling him how great he is. His brother, your brother Viserys, he had love, but he lacked the constitution that you have. You were made to wear the crown. I think this, combined with Alice later telling him how he didn't know his mother, pity, don't you think that you never knew your mother? To me, my theory about Daemon has always been that he lacked some crucial form of attention or approval in his younger days, so he ended up seeking it from his brother, Viserys. And that's where a lot of his motivation has come from. I think this starts to point at his mother. He didn't know her, and I think if he's dreaming of this, that means he was craving that attention. And because he never had motherly attention, I think his mind, if he thinks of a relationship, he can only think of it in one way, in this very intimate way. So that's kind of how I read this.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's kind of the way that he understands the feeling of closeness, at least like with a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Cut 2. And it's another one of those weird things where he's in the middle of a dream, but then suddenly he's back in reality in the middle of a conversation.
Those are... I'm starting to get some mixed feelings about the dreams being used as a way to like progress his character. But I will say, in terms of the editing, where they go from dream to the real world, that's really well done because it leaves you with the same kind of like befuddled, weird, out of place feeling that he has to have in that situation.
Yeah, the disoriented feeling. They do that stuff great. That's as much as I've previously complained about just my principled stance against dream sequences, I feel like they're executing them pretty well here.
Yeah. And we like all the diegetic sound.
Yes.
That's right.
We're not even going to define that for you.
No.
So he hears about Rook's Rest, what happened. He gets an update on the castle repairs. There's a lot more to do, and they have no money because Laris took it all back to King's Landing.
Now, how has that not come out yet? Like when Daemon is like, hey, I'm taking Harrenhal, don't you think one of the first things should be like, okay, just so you know, we're broke.
Okay, or also, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was going to say kind of the same thing, / you would also think Daemon would immediately be like, all right, like, what resources do we have here now that I'm in charge of this castle?
Is this a situation where your boss is clearly a jerk and you're like, I don't want to tell him we have no money. So you just wait until the absolute last moment where you're like,
you're afraid of, like, even though the right thing to do for everyone practically would be to share the information, they've created, they call this psychological safety, I think. They've made a space where he doesn't feel comfortable saying what he needs to say.
Exactly. Yeah, shockingly, Daemon has not created a very welcoming work environment. Simon meekly suggests, maybe you can ask Rhaenyra for money. Daemon says, no, I'm going to guarantee payment myself. And then this is also where he starts to upgrade a little bit. He calls him your grace, but now he's no longer happy with just your grace. I want you to call me my king. I love their little back and forth here where Daemon's
say my name.
Right. One of my least favorite scenes of Breaking Bad, but we don't need to litigate that now.
Yeah.
What would you call the husband of a queen? You'd call him the king. See, exactly. I would call him the king. Consort. That last part feels a little unnecessary.
Now, does the consort part mean he wasn't the one who got the actual direct transfer of power, but he essentially married into it?
Exactly. But I mean, he's not even the one in charge, right? If you're a king consort, it's the queen that's in charge.
That means you're married to the queen.
It's like being the first lady or first gentleman. What do they call it? First man?
The guy.
He's the guy.
Well, later we see Daemon working on Harrenhal. He's actually lending a hand, swinging an axe. And then he suddenly hears the screams of innocence. Those are the people that he sent the Brackens after. And I think he looks up, he sees Alice. So I think that she's kind of taking that sound and channeling it to him, forcing him to confront the atrocities that he's unleashing. And she chides him for it. Children are being taken away from their mothers. Wives are being carried away. And now you're going to raise an army of men who hate you because they're doing it under duress. That's the kind of army you want? He says that Aegon will probably die, and the realm will suffer if Aemon One-Eye rules. And then she makes a pretty pointed remark. I'm sure your tactics are approved by the queen. And he shoots back at her. The realm will never accept Rhaenyra. He's going on that old line. They're going to look to a man to rule, and who better than me? Viserys' first true heir. And that's when she throws a line at him. Pity, don't you think, that you never knew your mother? As though to say, all this nonsense, that's where it's coming from.
So to Adam's point that maybe these visions and stuff are kind of pushing him to double down on his inner demons and go after the throne, do we think, like, Alice is kind of arguing with him supposedly, for like the right thing here, but it seems like maybe she's actually manipulating Daemon.
It seems like she's goading him into this stuff.
Yeah, and the question is she doing it on purpose, or is she trying to get him to see the error of his ways by reaching into his subconscious and projecting these images to him, and it's just backfiring?
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think I'm getting the feeling that, I mean, I think we definitely don't know what her basic goal is, but I don't think it's as simple as trying to give him a conscience. I think she's operating on some other level that we don't totally understand, but I think the way, whatever, so far he is doing the stuff that she wants him to do, which means I think by bringing up, like, the way he treated the innocent people and everything, in a way it's almost like she's trying to get him used to the idea that he's capable, to put him in a position to have to defend it, to make him almost feel less conflicted about it.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel like this is kind of what she's aiming for, because I feel like if Daemon didn't come to Harrenhal and he wasn't having these visions and stuff, I feel like he would have stayed on Rhaenyra's side.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it feels like a step too far. I just can't imagine that all of this is such subtle and impressive manipulation on her part. Like, I really bought it when she's giving him a hard time here for the way that he's targeting innocent people. I saw emotion there where she's frustrated that the common folk are getting hurt in all this. Go ahead, Daniel.
So that might be true, right? Wanting to prevent some of the killing of the innocents, but like she's giving him these crazy visions and nightmares and that potion the other day.
We don't know that for sure. It's possible she's just privy to them. She knows what he's dreaming or has some inkling of it, but she's not the one feeding them to him.
I will say, I don't know what her motivations are. I think it's a really hard thing to speculate about, but it does seem like she wants him to get the throne. Maybe she wants him to do it in a certain way that is maybe less harmful to all these people. I can't figure that out, but it does seem like she's invested in his success for some reason. Maybe just because he's taken over Harrenhal, so it's going to affect her, but probably for some other reasons.
Yeah, she's definitely taken an interest in him, and we'll see where it goes. But,
and I think that interest may end up being romantic as well.
Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe not necessarily because she desires him, but because it could be a way to manipulate him further.
She might have to get a blonde wig to pull that off. Sir Simon arrives with news. The Brackens have bent the knee, but you can tell by his demeanor he doesn't necessarily see it as good news because he knows how it was accomplished. And one night he gets woken up. The River Lords are here. So these are leaders of other houses in the Riverlands, other houses aside from the Brackens and Blackwoods. And they are not happy with how he got the Brackens to bend the knee for him. This is the surprised Pikachu face of he's surprised that people are upset by this. And as they're yelling at him, telling him, we should have expected nothing more from the man who ordered a child to be killed in his mother's arms, and we will not raise our banners for a tyrant. So he may have gained the Brackens and the Blackwoods, but it looks like pretty much everybody else in the Riverlands are saying we want nothing to do with you now.
So wait, are these like neighboring lords, or these are lords that are below the Brackens?
I'll say I'm not 100% sure. The way I read it is that these are adjacent. These are other lords in the area. And maybe the Brackens and Blackwoods are two of the biggest, but the collective rest of the houses are not happy with what he did here. They're the River Lords. What else do you have to know? In the midst of all this, he has a vision of Raena, who says to him, a terrible war is being fought in these lands. Have you looked after our girls? And it was a good reminder for me because it's easy to forget that Raena and Bela are his daughters. And he's the only parent they have left. And at the moment, he has virtually no relationship with them. Now, this would be, if this image was conjured by Alice, it would suggest that she's trying to, pull him in a certain direction, improve him in some way to say, hey, you're neglecting your children right now. If he reconnects with them, perhaps that makes him more benevolent and will stop him from becoming such a cruel ruler. But TBD. Anything else, guys, in Harrenhal before we move on?
Let's go.
Let's go to King's Landing.
Smell
those rat catchers.
Dragon meat.
So yeah, the mix of dragon and rat catcher.
Well, they're like decomposing.
Both were decomposing.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Well,
they did a good job. Like you could see all the flies buzzing around the dragon.
Yeah.
I loved that moment. When you said the dragons look really good, I feel like this is the most real a dragon has looked. Seeing Meleese's head kind of rotting. Like it's an awful sight, but what a striking image. And what we're seeing here is that these creatures that the common folk see as gods, there's literally a character who says that, I thought they was gods. And now you
Just
see
meat.
it been reduced to a pile of meat. It made me pretty hungry, actually. And so they announce, they parade this dragon head through the streets and announce to the crowds, she was slayed by Aegon. And they think it should be a celebration. But the crowd does not take it well. It is a black omen, one bystander shouts. Rhaenyra will answer this. And they're worried about escalation, another bystander shouts. And one says, 'tis an abomination. And Cole's like, don't they realize we won the battle? This is the moment I was talking about when I felt like it doesn't feel very real the way the common folk are being represented. I don't doubt that people would say this, but it's not like we hear murmurs in a crowd. It's like this is all we hear. It's just too clean. It's just like when they were parading Aegon's dead son through the streets. And it's like you've paraded him through the streets. Bing, you have now won the favor of the people of King's Landing.
Yeah.
Like the common folk just feel like they just blow whichever way the wind is going. And they just announce as one, here is how we all currently feel. In 2 sentences, here's the summary of the sentiment of the small people of King's Landing.
I think the show is just not giving the viewer enough credit, and they're underestimating our ability. I mean, okay, they might be right to do this because most people aren't watching TV anymore. They're using their phones with the TV on in the background. So people actually aren't always looking at the screen because they could have done this better by just showing the people not looking happy, but looking disturbed. That would be enough because, okay, you could pause and think about it for a second and be like, oh yeah, I mean, the dragons are supposed to be like gods. They're these mythical, legendary creatures that it would just be very unsettling and shocking to see one of them reduced to that, rotting pile of meat. We don't need to then hear isolated voices one after another, basically telling us what we need to hear. Now, the thing is, though, some people do need that. And the show is appealing to the lowest common denominator.
Well, Adam, you got to be careful after all the things you missed already in this episode.
I know it's very ironic, but part of it is the show's fault because they keep using these cheap tactics that now I'm like coming to expect them, and it's changing the way I'm like watching the show on a meta level where I'm like, well, okay, what are the writers doing now?
That's the issue. We're all watching it on the regular level.
Yeah.
Adam's watching the show.
I'm watching from the sixth dimension over here.
Adam, instead of casting aspersions on everybody else, maybe you should take a look in the mirror once in a while.
Speaking of taking a look,
I'm not comfortable doing that.
Quick reaction to that scene, though. I did not have the reaction you guys had, but I understand it now that you describe it that way. That makes sense. I think I was just like, I loved the whole vibe of they thought dragons were gods, and they're parading a dead dragon's head through King's Landing. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, actually, I'll say this. So
I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the actual solution to the problem I'm saying, because I think if you just saw the look of the crowd, I don't know that I would have picked up on all this.
Well, and like the silence, you could hear. Well, it would be enough, I think, just to have Cole say, "Don't they know we won?" I think that's fine.
I mean, maybe. But I'll say that I think the actual idea of this is pretty strong.
Yeah.
Because I find it believable that they would think the people would see this as a big celebration, and I also find it believable that they wouldn't, and this would backfire. And I think this is a great example of what they're missing with Otto being gone, because I think he would have seen this coming.
Yeah, I mean, they're losing sight of the source of Targaryen power. Like this whole mythology and everything that Rhaenyra obviously understands. And
by parading that you just killed a dragon, well, now your own dragons no longer seem like they're that great.
They're
you've
mortal.
Your own position. They're what, Adam?
You've proven them to be mortal, which is not the image you want to project.
Yeah. All right. Well, back to my transition there.
Well, one more thing, and it does also kind of show. No, this is. I'm not crapping on the show further. What I'm going to say is, it also positions Team Green as they are not the House of the Dragon. They have dragons, but Team Black seems to have much more of a reverence for them. And like Team Black is kind of feels like the more true Targaryen line in a way. And it also is true in terms of what the actual succession was supposed to be. And so if the people fundamentally, why is
I don't know.
No.
I saw
what's
Daniel
funny is
smirking,
I just kept getting ready to interject, and then I just started laughing because it was silly that I had something I was excited to say, but I also knew that it was going to annoy Gil because Gil wants to move on. Sorry, that's why I kept laughing.
Anyway, what I'm saying is, you are now, if you're parading around this dead dragon and it's been reduced to this pile of meat, and it's no longer seen as this godly figure, and it's something that your own people killed, then between Team Black and Team Green, which one are the people going to see as the true dragon people?
Well, and so we're going to get to more of this later too, but Rhaenyra might kind of do the same thing because she's going to hand out dragons to blood Targaryens, but people who don't have the name Targaryen. And so that's also going to damage the mythology.
And that's why they taught us about Ulf.
That's right. Well, Ulf and Alan and Adam, who are Corlys's. Yeah, that's why they keep throwing in these little scenes with characters who we know have Valyrian blood, but they seem irrelevant so far.
Yeah.
Not so anymore. Daniel, to your point, Jace even says the idea that you need to have pure Valyrian blood to ride a dragon, he essentially says that was propaganda by our own people. And, okay, well, if we're going to violate it, you're now poking a big hole in that propaganda.
Yeah. Well, and not that you need pure Valyrian blood, but the myth that you need to be a lord.
Right. So this is the third time now I'm attempting this. Daniel, when you told Adam to take a look in the mirror, speaking of taking a look, Alicent takes a look at Aemon's belt, where he's got a certain dagger, the one he took from Aegon. I think clearly she's already, or is starting to suspect, that he played a role in what befell Aegon. Speaking of Aegon, we see them bring a box into the castle. They pull his body out. He's burned. He's hurt. Still barely alive. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, he's still barely alive. Then why did they slowly parade him through the street?
Yes, that was driving me crazy.
Well, they've been, he's been in that box for 10 days now? What's another?
Don't you think you would send riders carrying him?
This is an emergency. This is an emergency. It's an utter emergency, and they're just treating it as if no, he'll wait for medical care. It's fine.
Send a dragon. Send a raven requesting one of the people at King's Landing with a dragon comes and gets him. It's crazy.
I just wish the writers would step into it and be like, okay, how would people actually act in this situation? They would be panicked. They would be rushing. Maybe they wouldn't want the people to see the king being dragged in, at death's door, but that doesn't mean any rational or loyal follower of the king would be going that slowly and doing this slow procession. Now, that's another reason that I thought he was dead, because they're carrying around what looks like a casket, and they have no sense of urgency.
Yeah, I also felt like the fact that they were taking their time to bring Aegon's body into the castle, I thought he was dead. Otherwise, why wouldn't they be rushing him in? But I love the little details of the armor being stuck to his flesh as they were taking it off and everything. They really made you feel the critical condition of his body.
Yeah. It was like I always like the maesterly stuff in this whole series because the maesters are like some of the few intellectuals that exist in this world. They're the keepers of knowledge, but it's an interesting combination of things. Like, in our world, surgeons used to be barbers, like if you were a barber, you also knew how to like pull out an infected tooth. And you just have this interesting collection of knowledge all in this and skills all in this one person. And even it's built into the whole, like they're supposed to wear these chains, a link of chains around them. And each one is made of a different metal and it symbolizes another skill that they've acquired. And I just really, I find it's just like a cool world building thing.
Apparently, so back in the medieval ages, Adam, like you said, they were the only ones who had tools sharp enough for shaving and stuff. So that's why.
So like to see him like they peel the armor off and it rips off like all of his like burnt necrotic flesh coming off with it, and they're very good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
Visually.
The Maester asks Alicent to get out of here. The next hours are critical. Aemon doesn't care. He walks right up to
I really rolled my eyes when he said that.
I know these hours are critical. The last,
it's just like, are you
96 hours?
How can
he just wanted to get her out of the room because she was buzzing around,
Yeah.
Aemon, he doesn't care though. He walks right up to the bed and he's like, someone will have to rule in his stead.
Yeah.
Alicent pays Cole a visit. She tries to get some information out of him. And specifically, she wants to know what happened between Aemon and Aegon. He says, I could not say. Now, I know what you're thinking, Daniel. He probably got knocked out, so he doesn't remember. No. He was looking up at the sky when it happened. He gets knocked out after. So I believe he is withholding that information right now.
And he saw Aemon armed and ready to kill Aegon. And even if he can say, well, it was going to be to put him out of his misery, I still think that would be considered king slaying and kin slaying. I don't think that would be approved.
Yeah.
And Cole saw that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Cole's game right now is just, this is all so much worse than I thought it was going to be. It's a war of dragons, and now I see what that means. I'm going to just keep my head down. I'm not going to narc on Aemon. When I get asked in the following scene, who should be next in line, the party line is Aemon should go next. That's the correct order. I'm just going to go with that. Maybe he would have done it anyway, but I'm not even going to consider rocking the boat. And maybe
on some level, they have an established rapport already where he was scheming on the side with Aemon, and I don't think you can do that without developing some sense of loyalty to him. So, despite everything that happened, he, like you said, he's not going to rock the boat. He needs to kind of keep his head low and get through this and get serious. And if there is going to be a new king or someone to rule in his stead, it does make sense that it would be Aemon anyway, despite what I just witnessed.
I mean, I think that's all true, but I think Cole pretty explicitly explains why he made this decision when he talks to Alicent later, and he basically saw the horror of this war, like you were saying. Like, we've given the war over to the dragons, and I think like this is Cole giving up any last shred of like sense of honor, custom, like all these things, and it's just, this war is hell. We do need Aemon at the helm. Like, he's just sort of fully accepting that.
Well, and then at some point they're talking about how it was, all these masses of civilians and common folk who were getting burned and destroyed. And it reminded me of, a few hundred years ago, at least the way we imagine war back then was two armies meeting up in a field, like at an agreed upon time. And then you just keep killing each other until one side has more people alive, and the other's all dead or they've retreated. And then in like the late 1800s and going into like World War I and everything, suddenly war became modern and anything could be a target. and it's like Cole just witnessed that evolution.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And one more thing to add, he also says something about sort of protecting Alicent. We'll get to that later, but to some extent he might, do you really want to rule over the insanity that's about to come? So in a sense, I'm shielding you from it.
Yeah. And I actually found him to be quite genuine with what he was saying. I think he's like, that was a very harrowing experience for him.
Yeah, you see like 1,000-yard stare in his eyes. So we've already kind of talked about it a bit, but the next scene is the Green Council, where Alicent stands up and says, we need someone to rule in Aegon's stead. She nominates herself, and of course, the whole rest of the council overrules her. We gotta, and they make a good point. Who's the one who says it? Larys. The whole thing is that Rhaenyra can't be king. She's a woman. What would it look like if we did the same thing now on our side? But then he slyly throws it over to Cole. You're the hand. What do you think? And I think there's also a degree of, I know about the relationship between Cole and Alicent. Now I'm going to put him in a position where he has to essentially betray her. As they continue their discussion, once they decide on Aemond, they do this thing where the audio starts to sort of drop out. It slowly zooms in on Alicent. You see her looking to the left, and if you rewind a little bit, you see that sitting to her left is Cole. So she's burning a hole in the side of his head, just staring at him, not happy with him.
I think she like can't believe the situation that she's in and everything that happened.
Exactly. Now, what they are discussing as she's sort of zoning out and just seething is many of the small folk are leaving the city due to the Sea Snake's blockade. And this is where Aemond actually gives the order to keep everybody locked in. I thought it was an effective scene.
And cut down those rat catchers.
I love that moment.
That is a great touch because, like, yeah, they should. They're out there rotting. It's disgusting, and it can only make people feel worse.
Exactly.
And I think, right, like in this scene, you're seeing Alicent. The way I read it was part of her thinking here is like she's screwed up everything, right? And she's created a tyrant, right? Like she sees she has no control, and like everything is doomed.
Yeah, and I think at this point she's like probably pretty much accepted that Aegon wasn't supposed to be the next king.
Definitely. Yeah, I think she believes what Rhaenyra told her. Cut 2. Hugh and his wife, his family, his child is sick. They're hungry. They got to get out of here. All right.
It's very inconvenient timing.
Alicent confronts Cole. Wait, I thought you were loyal to me, yet you support Aemond's claim to the throne? What happened? And this is some of what we talked about before. He tells her what he saw at Rook's Rest. It's a war of dragons. A dragon rider should lead us. Have I not spared you? Do you really want to preside over this nuclear war that's coming? And he calls her.
And she
Alicent.
goes, "What's a nuclear?"
Right. She goes, I did not say you could speak my name, essentially.
Really cool line. Actually, two really cool lines. Alicent asking Cole, is strength to be our only god now? Thought that was a sick line. And then the other line from Cole, what we must do now is terrible. I thought that was that to me was one of the most memorable moments of this episode.
Yeah. I remember that moment.
I like this, like, no, but I really like, we had like dark Cole, after he stopped being like cool Cole, but this is now like cool dark Cole, like I like this new Cole.
Yeah, I would say I thought about it this episode, and I was like, I borderline am liking his character. I mean, I like him as a character. I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying. We'll see. Keep an eye out. Hugh and a bunch of other civilians are trying to leave. They're locked in. And the guard announces, as ordered by Aemond. And they're like, huh? Aemond? Is he talking about the king? So at this point, the general public isn't aware of what's going on, where Aegon is incapacitated, probably has no control over his bowels, and Aemond is currently taking the reins.
Aegon needs control over his bowels like you need a hole in the head. Except the opposite of that. It doesn't really make any sense.
One stormy night, Aemond is looking at the throne. Helena walks up to him and asks him, "Was it worth the price?"
So we've heard him talk of prices before, right? Where he gave up an eye in exchange for a dragon.
That's true.
And it's the same thing.
And
I mean, it definitely was worth the price.
Yeah, in this case, what price was it? Because he didn't like Aegon.
Well, there were moments. Yeah, I guess we didn't see a lot of affection from Aemond toward Aegon.
I was trying to see it. I was trying to see some kind of positivity between them, even during like that brothel scene, which I was just totally wrong about. So you guys kind of convinced me. Like, he hates him.
Yeah, he does. The only scene I was thinking of is Aegon showed respect toward Aemond. That there was one scene where Aemond walks into the council uninvited. Alicent's like, you shouldn't be here, and Aegon wants him to stay. Yeah. It's like one moment this season where I see some respect from him. But it is strange. I mean, we're sort of taking it for granted that Helena understands what happened. She may have pieced it together that Aemond probably was involved in taking down Aegon, or maybe as part of her dragon dreaming, she is able to intuit it. In terms of the price, some of it might also just be an internal price. Even if you don't like your brother, do you still want to burn him to a crisp and kill him? I mean, it seems like you wanted to. Yeah. But I don't think he's a sociopath, you know?
But that's the interesting thing is we actually, we don't see any evidence. Okay, maybe a little evidence that Aemon's not I was going to say that Aemon seems like a straight up sociopath these last few episodes, but I guess we had those vulnerable scenes between him and the prostitute.
She has a name. She's not like the Brackens. She has a name. Her name is Sylvie.
Madam Sylvie.
But we have very little to go on in terms of believing that Aemon has a conscience.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you cut out the scene with Madam Sylvie, he would just be a Terminator. Basically.
I mean, even picture.
Go ahead.
Just picture a 15-year-old kid saying, "I lost an eye but gained a dragon," right? It's not normal kid behavior.
Next, you're going to find out he's been wetting the bed and setting fire to buildings.
He actually said, I listened to the interview with him on the official podcast. He took inspiration from Michael Myers, the serial killer. Just the ambiguous look in his eyes where you can't tell what his motivation is. The fact that he never stops, he always catches up to you. I definitely see it. I think also in terms of what's the price, some of it might be internal. Some of it might also be, as much as he hasn't shown that he cares, this probably destroys any possible relationship he could have with Alicent. I mean, how is she going to look at her son knowing that he attempted to and came close to killing her other son?
And we do kind of know that is important to him psychologically in some way, right? We looked at the relationship he had with the prostitute. Sorry, Adam.
Sylvie.
With Sylvie, right? She's older, right? Yeah. So there was a sort of motherly thing going on there.
Yeah, which again, Aemond and Daemon, it seems like they both have a similar issue there. Later, we see Aegon breathing raggedly. And I'll say in this moment...
What's irraggedly?
Yeah.
I said breathing raggedly.
Oh.
Reminded me of Viserys. Just seeing him lying on that bed, half his face burned. Alicent's sitting over him, and when she leaves the room, he says, "Mommy!"
It was... It's hard to separate the feelings I have from, because I'm convinced he should have died given what his body went through, but I also know that they could have just depicted the events a little differently, and then I wouldn't feel that way, So I'm trying to look past it. If I look past it, it's interesting when you think of all the things he could have said. For him to say "mummy" is interesting because it's basically saying we don't know how his brain's working, but emotionally it reveals he's at his lowest possible point and he just needs someone to love and care for him. Why every time I talk, you guys start laughing at me?
Because I just thought of, I was going to say maybe he didn't actually say it. It might have just been air escaping.
Oh, wait, we need to issue a correction about the gas escaping thing.
Yeah, do you want to take it or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, well, I can do it, but why did we talk about it in the first place?
It was because Adam went woo at the beginning of last episode.
Or
2 episodes
yoo-hoo.
ago. Yeah.
That's why?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we said it reminded us of this really, really overweight character in Futurama who kept every once in a while, it was just partying like crazy, and every once in a while you'd hear him go, woo! And everyone thought that, he was just partying. And it turns out he'd been dead for a very long time, and that was just gas escaping from him. And what it turns out is that's basically a scenario in which Bender from Futurama became a human and was basically allowed to just do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted, but he had to suffer the biological consequences.
By the way, it wasn't gas escaping; it was air escaping through the folds of his flab.
There you go.
Okay, Adam, I agree. Yeah. I think it's a more interesting result for him not to die because now we get to see, assuming he has some degree of a recovery, and I don't see what's the point of having him live at this point if he's just going to now die. So I assume he's going to get to a point where it becomes, he just woke up here, so maybe next episode he's very frail, but he's talking. It'd be very interesting to see how this changes him, and how is he going to interact with Aemond after this. Is he going to be... it's not going to suddenly raise his IQ and make him smarter about all this, but I don't know. Some change in his character will be really interesting.
Well, it's in a way, it's kind of like Cole, like going through some horrific, traumatic experience. We're going to see how that affects him. Right now, all we have to go on is to say it affected him in a way that all he could muster was to ask for his mom, which does say a lot. And I agree that this is an interesting plot development for sure. My complaint is just what the execution of it was.
Yeah. And I think it goes along with the theme of, it seems like relationships with mothers seems to be important here. Aegon, Aemond, Daemon.
Yeah. But
I think that wraps it up for King's Landing. So now, let's head to Driftmark. Smell the sea air beneath us. Even high above the waves, there is a brackishness to the air. Seagulls cry in the distance. This is Forbes, I'm quoting.
Yeah.
All right, we're in Driftmark. Corlys is in mourning. Great moment. There's a single tear because he's grieving for Rhaenys. They had a genuinely loving relationship. They had the healthiest relationship, I think, of any characters on this show. So we had to know it was doomed from the start.
Yeah.
But maybe this is a better ending than... You look at like Alicent and Rhaenyra. They were great friends, become bitter enemies. Maybe it would have been better if one of them died. Let's head to Dragonstone. Smell that. Well, so
there's like a lot of candles.
Driftmark.
Well, we're gonna have to go back and forth here because otherwise it won't make any sense. So we left Driftmark. We're at Dragonstone. Black Council meeting. Go through all the updates. Cole is marching through the Crown lands unchallenged, and we have no ground army except the one that we hope Daemon will raise, who left us after some marital spat. So none of the men on this council are showing Rhaenyra any respect. And it leads into a discussion of how no one respects her. They point out that as a woman, you have no battle strategy experience. She makes a great point. Neither do you. We've had 80 years of peace. The men want to strike King's Landing before Vhagar has recovered. And so Rhaenyra's like, I'll do it. Let me go die in battle, please.
Yeah. It reminds me of Shogun, where literally every scene, another person is insisting that they commit seppuku.
Right, and we even talked about this last episode. It seems like in this show, if you see an opportunity, it's like Mad Max Fury Road. Everybody wants to die, shiny in chrome, and ride on the highways of Valhalla. But they tell her, you can't go and die in battle. Now, what do you want me to do?
Anything, literally anything else.
Well, we cut to Jace, who's checking in on Bela. He wants to go to Harrenhal and check in with Daemon. Something nobody's done so far. And just make sure that he's doing what we think he's doing, that he's still loyal to Rhaenyra.
It's a good idea.
But really, this is just him being frustrated at not being allowed to actually do anything and contribute to the war in any way. And he found a way. Here's somewhere maybe I can contribute. Go talk to Daemon. But then he gets an idea. The Freys control the twins, a crossing that if they were allowed to use that crossing, Cragen Stark's Greybeards, remember he lent Rhaenyra an army of these older soldiers from the Wall, they're on their way, but it's taking forever. If they could use the twins, this crossing, they could get here to the Riverlands a lot faster. We wouldn't even need Daemon's army. I'm going to go talk to the Freys. Bela, don't tell Rhaenyra until after I leave, because she's not going to let me go.
Here's a thought. Instead of using a tapestry as like the opening for the show, they should have used that war table that they have at Dragonstone, like an abstract kind of coolified version of it, where you can see all the troop movements and the tactics and stuff. First of all, it would actually be kind of helpful to the audience, but I also think it would. I mean, the show is becoming a show about this war and like all the little geographic challenges and like the different places they're trying to control. I think that would be cooler.
That would be that table is like the coolest thing introduced in this show, where they put the fires underneath it so it lights up the map.
Glowing, yeah.
Very cool. Let's just follow Jace to the twins, okay? So he meets with the Freys. The Freys are the ones who said, I'll find another, the Red Wedding. He does a lot of bargaining with some of Daemon's things, because he promises, I and Daemon will protect you with our dragons, but ultimately what they want is Harrenhal, the castle that Daemon is currently fixing up. But Jace tells them, for that, my mother is going to want more than your crossing. She will want bent knees, which that I thought was a cool line. The way he phrased that. He didn't say you're going to have to bend the knee. She's going to want bent knees. And then there's some heroic music after that. So this is one of the first things we've seen Jace go out and do, and it seems like he did a good job. Because the Harrenhal thing threw me for a second, but then he clarifies they want Harrenhal after the war is finished. So I think they're probably fine with that.
Yeah.
Well, and
I mean, go ahead.
Well, and then also it's like, I guess there's a moment when he explains that to Rhaenyra later, and I feel like they're both amused by the fact that they want Harrenhal. And I interpret it in like two ways. One is, I guess, like they don't really care who takes what. But then the second is like, yeah, then Daemon can't keep Harrenhal is the other part.
True. And so it seems like he got what he wanted. They're going to get that crossing. Let's hop back to Dragonstone. Rhaenyra has a talk with Mysaria. If dragons aren't going to win this war, maybe worms can. The white worm, Mysaria. She tells Rhaenyra how the small folk in King's Landing are starting to turn on their leadership because of the everything we talked about earlier. We can stoke those flames. And a similar conversation that Daemon had earlier with the Brackens or the Blackwoods. There's things that the crown cannot be seen to do. Here, what you cannot do, let others do for you. And there is more than one way to fight a war. Echoing, yeah. Anyway, so Mysaria is going to go to King's Landing or send someone to King's Landing to continue to spread those rumors and sort of stoke those flames of discontent. A couple of other details here. Rhaenyra makes the point about how Viserys didn't really train her to fight because she was a girl. Instead, she held his cup and learned all the different family names and everything. Though I think here she's skipping over the fact that probably does help her to be more strategic, even though she hasn't really been so far all that much. And we see once again that she's refusing to speak to Daemon. Doesn't want to be seen asking him for help. If I am supplicant to him, what does that make me? Though I ask, if you just let him sit at Harrenhal, hanging out with a bunch of ghosts, doing whatever he wants, telling people to call him your grace. What does that make you? Sorry, doesn't say any of that, though. But she does send a representative to King's Landing. We see her get there later on, and she finds her friend, I don't know, friend, co-worker, the Diana, the one that Aegon assaulted last season. So I assume that sort of turned her against the family, and so now she's part of the White Worm spy network.
How am I supposed to remember that?
I don't think that's that important that you have to remember that.
Okay.
All that really matters in the scene is that Mysaria is sending someone to King's Landing. They got there. Machinations have begun.
It's a great idea because the situation in King's Landing is already becoming dire. And I mean, this is the last thing that Team Green needs right now.
It almost feels like, how do you make it worse? I feel like Mysaria can just come back and say, like, I did it, and just take credit for what's already happening. We see Rhaenyra and Baela talk. They sort of relate over their shared grief for Rhaenys. And Rhaenyra says, with her gone, I think I need to rely on you. And I think specifically what she's talking about is previously, when she needed anything from Corlys, Rhaenys was always the one who convinced him to help. Now she needs Baela to do it. So she gives Baela that little hand pin to go to go offer Corlys the position of hand. Which made me realize, Rhaenyra hasn't had a hand all this time. And in Driftmark, we're back there now, Baela gives him the hand. At first, he's like, haven't I done enough? You know, is she just doing this to try and make up for my loss? I just want to go west. And he's run away before. Baela remembers.
What's west of Westeros?
In isolation, there's nothing wrong with that line, but why remind me? Why remind me of one of the dumbest plot points in the entire series?
Just think about how much worse it could have been. I started just making up a whole scenario in my mind where he does go west, and it ends up being like the Bermuda Triangle, and he sees, what's her name?
Arya.
He sees Arya from the future, and then they pass by her, and they're like, who was that? And she's like, a ghost from the past. I started writing this whole other show. Baela reminds him, Rhaenys was a person. She's not just a thing you lost. She chose to go fight. She was fighting for something, to see Rhaenyra on the throne. And I'm going to keep fighting for that. She inspires him to do the same. And on the spot, as is the way in this realm, you name people heir on an emotional whim. He tells her, you're my heir. And she's like, I'm blood and fire. Driftmark must pass to salt and sea.
Duh.
Idiot. Later, we see him contemplate, and he grabs the fist in his hand. He grabs the hand in his fist. Wait. All right, you want to go? Let's go. Okay, we're back to Dragonstone.
Wait. Are we going to go over everything you just said?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, just
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we're supposed to talk about it.
I was lost in thought now. I was just imagining my whole Bermuda Triangle thing.
Oh, man, I just got lost.
No.
Yeah. All right, the air thing. So this was something he and Rhaenys talked about last episode, but I can't remember what they talked about.
Okay,
I couldn't remember anybody's names.
The heir to Driftmark right now is one of Rhaenyra's sons, little kid. And she was kind of making the point like, hey, Corlys, if you die, that kid's going to take over. And Corlys is just, he's a kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. And she's like, you could name one of your granddaughters heir. And he's like, well, they don't know anything of the sea. But he seems like now, in this moment, he's been, I don't care. You're going to be my heir anyway.
What if, now Corlys is a free agent, and marriages are very useful for forging alliances, and they need all the help that they can get. So I wonder if that's going to come up at all. He's a very eligible bachelor.
That's true. Who could he marry?
Because he needs an heir.
If Aegon dies, he can marry Helena.
Oh, and that'll just solve the entire war?
Yeah. It's probably not going to happen.
Probably not.
All right, back to Dragonstone. Rhaenyra meets with Sir Alfred. He was one of the louder voices at the council being a jerk to her. He sends her to Harrenhal, finally. I can't just send a raven to check in on Daemon. He'll ignore it. I'm going to send you, Sir Alfred. I want you to reason with him. And in particular, I want you to find out his intentions. Is he trying to get the throne for me or for himself? Do you have any messages for him? Tell him I'd like to finish our last conversation.
What was their last conversation?
That's when they were arguing, and she was telling him, you're doing this because...
It was Viserys couldn't trust you.
Yes, yeah, that conversation. Yeah. And then Jace returns to Rhaenyra. And essentially the sentiment of their conversation is, you did a good job going to the twins, the fray, dealing with them, but what the hell? I didn't tell you to do that, and I didn't say you can do that. But he did do a good job. And before I go to the conclusion of this conversation, when Jace walks in, he finds her reading about Visenya, Vagar's first rider, wielder of Dark Sister, and Jace says to her, I hope you don't mean to look to her as an example. Why shouldn't I? Because it was a long time ago. And I think, Daniel, what does that mean? That she wants to go out and fight in battle? And he's like, you can't do that. I know this episode is at least the second time she has tried to get on her dragon and ride off into war.
That seems reasonable.
Whenever we finally see her do that, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Or it won't be.
I'm trying to be positive. I
don't know what point I was making there. The conclusion of the conversation is we need dragons. Jace points out, we got 2 huge dragons beneath us, but we don't have anybody to ride them, Rhaenyra points out. And that's when Jace has the idea. There are people out there with Valyrian blood. Yeah, but they have to be a lord. That's what we said. I don't think that's true. And then they pan over to all these papers where they have records of essentially people with Valyrian blood who married into other families.
Probably thousands of them.
Tons of them.
Yeah.
And we've met a few of them. We pointed them out earlier. Ulf, Alan, Adam.
I was confused about that. So those are like bastards. I didn't at first actually like that. I didn't think about that because I didn't think they were talking about bastards. I thought they were just talking about like Targaryens who married into like House Tully, whatever, like these different houses.
Yeah, I don't think it's who they were talking about, but I think they might just end up saying like, look, we might have to settle for a couple of bastards because that's who's nearby. And they're the only ones that we've met, at least knowingly.
And if it's just like a random bastard, like how do you...
It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right saying it over and over.
How do you know they're going to like stay on your side? Like I get like maybe Adam, like he's already fights for, House...
and Alan's the one we've spent the most time with.
Yeah. But I don't know if you pick some like that random guy at that bar who's like,
Ulf.
I got Targaryen blood. Like, I don't like, is he going to fight? I don't know.
I assume there's going to be a vetting process.
One other question. How long does it take for dragons to get to be like at least big enough to ride? Because like they have so many
years.
eggs. Man, like imagine if it only took like a year, you could put like 20 bastards on like little dragons flying around.
I think it takes years, and you have to it's actually an issue is like getting enough food for them to fuel the growth.
The way that you're talking about like getting a bunch of eggs and raising all these dragons really makes me think of like a resource management game. And I don't know if you guys saw the ad, but we have Game of Thrones Conquest.
I did see the ad. Yeah.
I tried downloading it. It's a scary game because there's so many buttons and menus. It's very intimidating. But
is it the one where there's like 10 different types of currencies and they're just trying to get you to spend as much money as possible?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I found it funny at the beginning. I think the game was probably designed a few years ago and ties more into the original series, but they're trying to introduce House of the Dragon elements. So it starts off with Tyrion talking to Daenerys, and he's like, hey, there's a letter here that was written by Rhaenyra 200 years ago. She left you an egg somewhere around here. You should, and you find the egg, and that's how the whole game starts. I found that funny.
Is it like a Tamagotchi?
No, it seems like my impression is that it's some kind of a resource management game, raising dragons and whatnot. That's where the episode ends. Any final thoughts on the episode? I guess we talked a little bit
basically, the poignant thing that they're ending on is we need to find more dragon riders.
Right.
It's interesting because it wasn't delivered as a very climactic thing, but that's what they chose to end on. So
they made it feel pretty.
Yeah.
Like she kind of says, it's crazy. I mean, what we're about to do, this is insane.
Yeah.
The end.
And it kind of comes full circle from the beginning, right? Where they're like parading a dead dragon, and it's destroying sort of this mythology around the Targaryens, and they're kind of doing the same thing. Like we're seeing such a massive change in like the culture of Westeros and of like the ruling class.
Well, it's also, I was comparing this to like the transition from like quote unquote like more civilized war. But also if you think about it, back then everyone wore suits all the time, even when it was really hot out. And now we all dress like slobs.
It's true.
So it's like this cultural degradation.
So imagine
me, I'm Exhibit A.
Yeah, if you fast forward Westeros to our time, what's that world going to look like?
TikTok.
I don't even want to imagine it. It's funny, we talk about how the idea of dragons is being degraded for the culture in this show, no longer being seen as gods. I kind of was feeling that way myself. Seeing one get killed so easily, it does kind of diminish them to some extent, but not in a negative way toward the show. That's written into the show. That's part of it.
Actually, that reminds me, a friend of mine had a criticism of last episode, who listens to this podcast, by the way. Thank you, Kevin, for listening. He had a criticism of last episode. He said it was too easy the way Rhaenyra and her dragon was killed. He was saying what should have happened is she should have fought like extremely well. Like maybe even she set the ambush for Vhagar. Like, like Vhagar was like hiding, and that's how like what if she had done that to Vhagar? But the point is that Vhagar is still just so strong that no matter how cunning Rhaenys was, she still gets killed. And I like that it would have maintained a little more dread about Vhagar and more just I
think that's a really good point, because you still end up with the outcome that the show needs, but in a kind of a more glorious way, and with like more kind of reverence for the dragons, or more respect for the sheer size and danger of Vhagar,
and more respect for Rhaenys also.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'm thinking about as we talk about this is in Game of Thrones. Now, in this world, we're talking about how dragons are kind of losing their like cultural status. Because humans are kind of forcing it to happen. In Game of Thrones, dragons are like a legendary thing that haven't been seen in hundreds of years. All that's left are these eggs, which like Daenerys doesn't even believe that they could ever hatch. I have to imagine that this series will essentially lead to the death of every one of these dragons.
I bet at the end there's going to be a narration. It'll be like Otto saying, "Soon the world won't even remember dragons. They will fade into legend." And it'll be very prequelish, leading right into it.
And then you see he wrote a book chronicling the events, and it was called
Fire and Blood.
Fire and Blood. And that he's actually what's the name of that like jester who's supposed to have been one of like the witnesses who contributed to the story? Because like Fire and Blood is like written from the perspective of like historians, and then there's also I forget his name. He has a weird name.
Darren?
No. But anyway, it turns out that was actually Otto's pen name. Mushroom. It was Mushroom was his name. The court jester.
Nice.
And that's why the story is meant to be like you don't know what exactly to believe from that like chronicle, because it's actually being written by people in the world. It's not written by like an objective like omnipotent narrator.
Right. So there are cases where the show contradicts the book, and I think we're supposed to read it as, well, the book was a historical account, an attempt to figure out what happened, and now we're seeing the actual objective. If you stuck a camera into that time, this is what really happened. All right. Well, Daniel, do you have any final thoughts to wrap this up?
No, I think we covered it.
Adam?
I think what episode was this?
5. We got 3 left.
Things are, I mean, considering that was, relatively speaking, a calmer, slower episode, I think things are about to, like, pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fire and blood.
All right, with that, I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Adam.
Dracarys.
Yeah, when they... It feels so... We took a... Okay, I'm not going to explain it.